be fiscally conservative. Does that mean the city must pay cash for all projects, or do you support issuance of bonds in some instances? We'll start with Mr. Russell.
Part of my platform has been that we ought to seek all the best financial options that we can. I actually would be in favor of finishing the building now, and if needed, and I think it would be needed, to bond for the extra money beyond the 2.2 that has been set aside for that. The reason is I've done a financial analysis on that, and for those of you that like net present values and internal rates of return, I have that kind of stuff, but basically the expected cost of building after this depression, where we've been in a bucket right now, is going to be pretty significant. If we wait to build the rest of it, we're going to spend more, and it'll take us 11 to 12 years to save the same amount of money that we would pay off on a 10-year loan on that, and the payments would be the same every year. So I think we're actually looking at a more expensive option to the city. And why, if we can buy our homes under a loan as individuals, can't we as a community of individuals do that to help us in our financial situation?
Mr. Satterthwaite. It's a good thing I didn't catch you with a mouthful of food, huh?
Yeah, it is. What does it mean to be fiscally conservative? In the city of North Ogden, the business of the city, at least in part, is to serve the citizens. That public works building is core business. It's something that we just do. My opinion and feeling is that the city's been incorporated for decades. The city leaders should plan far enough ahead for things like police and sewer and water and public works, so that we anticipate those costs and don't have to bond. I am against bonding, and if we can avoid it, we should. I would only bond or go into any kind of debt if there was an emergency, and to me, an emergency represents a lack of planning.
Mr. Urey?
I consider myself fiscally conservative because I was raised by a father who was fiscally conservative. If I asked him if I could go to the movie, he always asked, "Do you have the money?" If I said no, he said that I couldn't go to the movie. You know, I've always been that way. To say I would always say no to bonding, no, I don't believe that. And I will tell you another story from my father. I had a car when my wife and I were first married. I needed a part for the car. I had been taught not to go into debt. I was up at my father's house fixing a car, and I would tell him I didn't have the money. He said, "You damn fool, sometimes you have to use your Visa card." So for me to say unequivocally I would never bond for anything in the city, that's not true. I would be wise with your money, as wise then with my own, but I would listen to all of you and listen to other points of view too.
Mr. Baker?
My stance is the same as Jim's on that. I've been taught all my life, and I believe in it, that correct principle is you stay out of debt unless absolutely necessary. That does not mean that sometimes debt isn't necessary. However, I've found with proper planning, you can avoid a lot of debt. And so that's where I stand on the debt issue. I do it with my own personal finances and my family, and I think running the city, it's the same principle applies. I will not spend your money any differently than I'll spend my own. Now, that doesn't, you have to have balance. That doesn't mean it's extremism and we let our streets get big potholes and not fix anything. I do things in my personal life and with the city with common sense and wisdom and with balance, but you stay out of debt unless it's absolutely necessary. That's the last resort, on the last end, not on the front end. The four of us council members earlier this year voted for the $2.2 million cash for the facility. All of us said if in the end we have to bond for a little bit, we will, but that's the last resort.
Mr. Taylor?
I think being fiscally conservative, which I certainly consider myself, is based on two principles. One is spending the least amount that's possible to do the job, to serve the residents in this case, and the other is properly planning for the future. There's a balance between those two things because things in the future costs money now to have the money set aside, so to avoid the bonds in the future, which I agree with. And I think part of that is we need to spend the money that's collected for the purpose for which it was collected. An example of that is the city had almost $2.5 million saved for that public works project, but then diverted nearly $2 million of it to build a new Parks and Rec building. And think how different that conversation would have been in 2011 if we'd had all that money still there. The same thing, I don't think we should have taken as much out of the funds. That's my personal opinion, to fund the facility, because we're just taking money where it'll be needed for other issues down the road. Thanks.
Mr. Swanson.
If we look at it on the federal issue, if we look at Social Security, we look at Medicare, and the problem that they're in, if the government had just left the money where it was earmarked to go, instead of seeing the interest in this big account growing and saying, you know, we've got this little pet project over here that we'd really like to take some of that money. Then we'll take a little more, and then we'll take a little more, and then we end up in the situation that we're in. I think if we earmark money for a particular project, it ought to stay there and not be taken for some other pet project that comes along later on. I cannot and will not categorically say that I am against bonding. There are times when it is the appropriate thing to do. Now, we need to be wise. To me, being fiscally conservative means you spend when it makes sense and when it's appropriate. And you save when it makes sense and when it's appropriate. It doesn't mean you say no to spending all the time. It doesn't mean you say no to debt all the time. It means you do a good analysis. It means you do the right thing and the wise thing for the given circumstance.
Starting with Mr. Bigler. Our city employees have been leaving in high numbers over the last 2 years. How do you intend to keep our valuable employees so we don't have to keep hiring and training new people?
I believe in treating employees fairly, and what I had done, there's been a lot said about that, about employee dissatisfaction and so forth. What I had done a couple of years ago in our budget meeting, I asked that an independent committee look at our structure of benefits, not just salary, but all of the compensation package, to see if we're in line. And that was finally done, and now we're following their compensation recommendations. I believe in treating employees fairly. However, I do not believe in extravagance just because they're a government worker. They should get paid fairly, just like the private sector does, like most of us do. Fairly for the job they do, but sometimes, you know, when you're setting your own pay scale, it can go up, so we have to balance that out and be careful.
Okay, Mr. Swanson.
Caught me with a mouthful of food. Same question.
Who's passing the food?
Same question, sir.
How are we going to keep and retain folks so we don't have to hire and retrain them?
Well, in any business, a certain amount of turnover is expected and is normal. I think the turnover has been high. When it comes to our city employees, the number one thing that you would never hear from me as an elected official is to sit in a public meeting and in reference to city employees say, I know people that would do your job for $10 an hour. It's demeaning. It sends a tone that tells the employees that we believe you're overpaid, you're a government worker, and all government workers are overpaid. You won't hear that from me. Those kind of conversations about compensation and those kinds of things should be held in private and not in a public spectacle where it affects the employees and how they feel.
I have to plead ignorance. Is there someone that needs to have 30-second rebuttal on that?
I would say on that, fairly but not extravagantly. However, you
No,
can't.
we're talking about someone said in a meeting that he or she knew folks.
Yes, Councilman Member Bigler has said that in a number of meetings, public council meetings.
Okay, so Mr. Bigler, you have 30 seconds for nothing.
And I would say respectfully, I've not said that in a number of council meetings. However, We cannot do private. That's the beauty of the government and the way the system is. All, not just votes are done before you, all negotiations are done before you. So to say we got to do this in private behind the table, that is not the way it works. I have always been fair, and I think that fair compensation, and that's why I wanted an outside source to do the committee, to be the committee to do that of experts. They did it. We're following their counsel and their advice and their findings.
Mr. Satterthwaite, the original question was, how do we keep people and not have to spend money to retrain new ones?
I think the first thing we need to do is be sure that we're hiring the best people. I've come to learn that in many cases, in businesses I've been in, that we've found we need to find better ways to select people. And when we get the best people, they perform in such a way that people want the city or the employer wants them there, and they like to be there because they're doing a very beneficial job. Past that, I don't understand why we have perhaps some differences in compensation or some people that are not happy. I don't know how many have left. I didn't get the sense that a lot have. But clearly we need to make sure that we're paying commensurate with what's being paid in government, other government, the cities, and in the private sector. And then we need to look at the total compensation package, including leave benefits and retirement and all of that. I think if we choose good people and pay them like we should.
Thank you. Mr. Russell.
This is one of the issues that I've seen in the past couple of years, and I believe that the employees are under-respected. They're good employees. Everyone that I've been and dealt with have been good to a T, and they haven't gotten a pay raise in 6 years. They got a lump sum this past year, but I've looked at the budget and I haven't seen any budget items in the upcoming year that have an increase for them at all. Ron Chandler, our city manager, has come up with a plan of how we can save a couple $100,000 a year in operating expenses. Those don't have to be delegated to certain things, and I would be supportive of having some of that catch the employees up, as the committee that was put together found that the employees are indeed underpaid, and I think it is a problem, and I think it needs to be addressed, but it can't just be with hollow words. It needs to be with something more concrete, and that's how I would approach that.
Thank you, Mr. Uri.
Well, I don't feel it's unusual for people even in private business to look for other jobs that would pay them better. I think there were often times when, in my career, that I thought I was being underpaid, and I probably had a few bosses thought I was overpaid. But I can think of one boss that I had in my life that I would have, and it was a female, and I would have followed her to hell and back because I felt like I was valued by her. And so I think if we let our employees know that they're valued, and that doesn't always have to be in the form of extra pay or extra benefits, it can be shown in various ways.
Thank you. Mr. Taylor.
Yeah, agree with what Jim just said, took the words out of my mouth. I think it's not so much about pay as it is about mutual respect. Our employees just want to feel respected by their city leadership. And I think that's something that we can just work on in a positive manner, in saying positive things. And if there are accusations or poor performance, state law does allow for that to be taken care of in a private manner and not in a public setting. So I'd like to see that. The other thing I'd say is I've managed a lot of employees in my life in both the private and the public sector, several hundred. And I think you just have to build relationships of trust where employees know that you care about them. And I'm very cheap in business, but one of my employees came recently to me, he needed a raise. It was more than I want to pay, but he's worth it. I have to keep him. He's that good. And so I did it. So I think we just have to take a look at those key employees and look at the salary study, because there was found that our employees are largely underpaid versus other cities. We need to change that.
Thank you. The final question, I'm told, big heavy sigh. What are